All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the State Examples of Septic System Data Management webinar. This webinar is a part of our decentralized webcast series. The Decentralized Wastewater MOU Partnership has a series of webinars that we conduct quarterly, and you're welcome to listen into past webinars on our website at www.epa.gov/septic. Today's webinar will be featuring 3 state examples of various ways to manage septic system data. We've noticed that one of the key challenges of septic system data is that since every locality or county government manages septic system data differently, it's hard to get a picture of data across the states or across the country due to lack of standardized data. And sometimes that data might not be accessible at all, whether it's in paper records or stored in other means. So we've put together this webinar to learn a little bit more about different ways of managing septic system data. We have 3 state representatives from the Virginia Department of Health, Florida Department of Health, and Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. These representatives will be touching upon an overview of the data infrastructure within their state, outlining ways that they standardize data, benefits to data management, and also they'll provide a demo of their database and share any reports or maps that they've created from data analysis. They'll also be sharing tips and lessons learned to benefit others looking to standardize their data as well. So with that, we'll start with Virginia first. We have 2 representatives from Virginia. Sonal Iyer is the director of the new division of data management and process improvement with the Virginia Department of Health. Her division is responsible for environmental health database management and transitioning into the new database. She's also responsible for environmental health data analysis and visualization and process improvement. Prior to joining the Virginia Department of Health, she worked as a human health and ecological risk assessor with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality and the Delaware Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. And prior to that, Sonal was involved in designing wastewater treatment plants. She holds a master's degree in microbiology and environmental science and engineering, as well as biology and toxicology. With Sonal is Lance Gregory. Lance Gregory is the director of the Division of On-Site Sewage and Water Services, Environmental Engineering, and Marina Programs with the Virginia Department of Health. His division works with Virginia's 35 health districts and industry stakeholders to develop and implement regulations related to on-site sewage systems and alternative discharging systems, private wells, and marinas. Mr. Gregory has worked in a variety of programs within the Virginia Department of Health, on-site sewage and water programs at the local district and central office level, providing useful perspectives of the program's impacts at the individual community and statewide level. So with that, please do welcome Sonal and Lance, and I'll pass it over to them to start with Virginia's presentation. So Lance and Sonal, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kira. This is Sonal. Thank you, EPA, for inviting us for this webinar series. We're excited to be part of this and sharing our information, knowledge, and experience and lessons learned. So with that, I think I will start the Virginia portion of talk today. So we have, at VDH, we use a central statewide database called Virginia Environmental Information System, VENUS. The way Virginia Department of Health is structured is that we have a central office in Richmond, and then we have several districts across the state that actually administer the program and collect the data for environmental health. And so it's in some ways we are at an advantageous position because we can have a central database because it's the same work that is done across the state under umbrella of VDH. So that's the database that we use. This database is maintained by a contractor, but it's managed from the central office in Richmond, specifically Office of Environmental Health Services. So the local health districts actually collect the data and enter the data in the database. And the local health districts do have some ability to customize their portion of database. So it's like having a big giant database with 34 smaller databases within it. Most of it is standardized, but the local health districts do have some capability of creating their special print forms or some similar type of smaller changes that they would need. The database comes with several canned standard reports, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But most of the reports and database changes are done by contractors. However, we have designated people in each health district as well as within OEHS central office who can manipulate the structure of the database to limited extent, just to make sure that we can respond to changing policy needs, regulatory needs, that sort of thing. So I'll quickly jump into the management part of this database, because that is something that is actually very critical for any database that is used by so many people all across the state under several different local jurisdiction as well. So the district databases are part of Venus, but they kind of are structured to operate as their own independent units. The reason for this is so that all the user information and giving access to people, terminating access to those who have left the department, all that can be controlled at a local level, and all those kind of requests need not come to central office. In the same token, there are several levels of access. So we have people who just enter the data and have a few different views. And then we have management people who can, have more access to different kinds of reports and capability to generate some ad hoc reports and everything in between. Every month, the system generates the list of users for each district. The districts verify it, and then it comes to central office. We verify it, and our IT department kind of keeps a tab on that too, just to make sure that people who need access have it, and those who have left those positions are terminated from the system. And we have detailed instructions on how new people get added to the system. It goes to the security requirements at VDH, and we monitor that on ongoing basis. There are designated people who look at that approval and rejection kind of information. Coming to the functionality of the reports, we have customizable print forms and drop-down boxes for data entry. Print forms are used to generate, inspections or letters or official correspondence that goes out from VDH to regulated parties. We have reports that come with the system, but all users have ability to request specialized reports based on General Assembly requests or FOIA requests or things like that. There is an active support forum that is maintained currently by our contractor, and they help us with, creating reports as well as fixing bugs or any kind of problems that, you have in database. We have ability to add new modules and new programs to this database. The contractor actually develops that, but that coordination happens through the central office, not through local health district. And the reason is we want to have a consistent and streamlined product that, is used across the entire state. Along with this, of course, we have, user training, job aids, those kind of hand-holding things. And all those administration type of things are done through central office, and also coordination with the contractor in terms of the contract as well as development is done through central office. So I will now pass on to Lance to talk more about on-site.
Thank you. So this system that we have, the database that we have, we do use for a number of programs within our Office of Environmental Health Services. So on-site sewage, private wells, restaurant inspections, hotels, marinas, there's a wide range of uses. But for today, obviously, we're going to focus on our on-site sewage system use. So within the database, we're using that. It's not to a point where we're paperless. We're still getting paper documents from applicants with their applications and from contractors, et cetera. But we are using that as the database as a mechanism to track that information and be able to report that out rather than having paper files. So we have standard data entry forms across the state, so where we have things like our standard applications that are used statewide, the information on those are listed as fields within the database as data points. We're also using it to track application statuses, the type of application, the date that we're receiving application, and these are all things that go into just tracking that individual permit or that individual application, but also plays into being able to provide reports on a larger scale. We also have design specifications for each of the on-site systems that are in the database. So looking at whether these are conventional systems or alternative systems with some type of treatment, what are the types of materials being used, the size of the tanks, types of treatment units when they're used, et cetera. Also, not just from the design aspect, but also from the evaluation aspect, where we're going out and doing our site and soil evaluations, documenting that information into the database as well. So our soil summaries and then our boring information. And I'll talk about the soil borings a little later as kind of a lesson learned. We also have our inspection notes, operations permits for issuing through the system. I will note that the database is just used by VDH personnel and health department staff. It's not something that's accessible for building officials, but we do have an ability in one unique case where our licensed alternative on-site sewage system operators within the state have a login where they're able to submit operation and maintenance reports. We have a requirement in Virginia that owners have their systems, alternative systems, visited at least annually, and so this provides a mechanism for those reports to be submitted to VDH. We're also, as I mentioned, we're tracking the types of systems, but this is also not just used for conventional and alternative systems, but it's also used for both small systems. So in Virginia, that would be systems that are equal to or less than 1,000 gallons per day, and large systems, so anything over 1,000 gallons per day. Those are all being tracked within our database if it's an on-site system. We also use it for tracking alternative discharging systems that are equal to or less than 1,000 gallons per day. So those systems equal to or less than 1,000 gallons per day, it's a joint permit between the Department of Health and our Department of Environmental Quality here in Virginia. Anything above that 1,000 gallon per day threshold is strictly going to be a Department of Environmental Quality permit. We have some newer components to the system that we've added in here recently with malfunction assessments and existing system evaluations, trying to look at age of systems when they fail, trying to potentially be able to get some more detail where we can better predict the cause of failures and maybe where failures could occur in the future, and be able to plan for that. And we also have sewage hauler permitting and complaints are tracked within the database as well.
So just to give some visual context, we are not going to actually do the demo of our system because we have, it will just take much longer time. So this way you can get a flavor of what our database is. So this right here, Okay, I'm trying to pull this. Yes. So this is the opening screen. This is the first view that you have. Like Lance mentioned, we have many different programs, including food and rabies. And so Septic Tank is just one of the many different environmental health programs that this database contains. But for septic data, once you open that module, this is the typical view. You can select how you want to view the information. We have several options. And on this side, you can see a little bit of how the information is arranged. So this is, our database is actually not a relational database. It's a parent-child type of relationship. So if you click on any of these records, it opens up a child document. And so first document is the physical location. And under that, we can create many different kinds of documents that, I think Lance mentioned while discussing, two slides ago. So we have owner information, permit application, inspections, denials, and approvals, all those informations that are part of the child document. So I'll just give one example of the permit application that relates to the design part of it. So if you look at this particular screenshot, you see several tabs here. Okay, this is not working. I'm trying to get the tilde down, but it won't. Okay, so we have several tabs here. Each tab has specific information. So obviously the administrative tab has basic information about where the system is. Under design tab, we actually have the design specifications such as residential size, number of bedrooms, gallons per day, system components such as, septic tank, conveyance system, distribution system, all that information. Under documents, we have, for example, completion statements, inspection reports, drawings. We can attach as-built or site plan or all kinds of engineering drawings that are part of this application. And the maintenance tab provides information about the last date of pump out, next date for maintenance. So all this information is pretty much housed within the database in one crisp group of tabs. We mentioned canned reports a lot. So most of these canned reports are developed by our contractor, and we log in to access this report. It's a different way to access the report than getting into database. And this is just one example of the report. We have ability to select the start date, end date, and we can pick either all or selected health districts to get the information. Right below the selection criteria, the report will tell the conditions that this report is pulling information from. And we use this canned report. We have many different kinds of canned reports that are used for just tracking of systems, to managing workload, to just evaluating statewide performance of a program, or different performance criteria that we use to measure district performances. So this, depending on what the report is set up to provide information about, we can use this report not just for technical purposes, but for management use as well.
So just to give a little bit of flavor of how we're using these kind of canned reports for analysis and looking at community needs. So as Sanal mentioned, we have canned reports. We're also able to develop ad hoc reports. And, the canned reports, certainly speaking with our local health department, they could share with you much better how they're using those reports in different ways to help them manage the program at a district or local level. And also the views that Sanal showed kind of through the left-hand side of the database, where they can kind of change those views of how the data is shown, is another way that they can use that feature for management. with the ad hoc reports, we're using those for developing reports to the General Assembly, addressing FOIA requests and other business needs. We're able to use those reports to do quality assurance and identify maybe where there's some data cleanup needs within the database. We can also use the reports to look at trends and certain, maybe looking at types of applications. We also use the data that we collect and report out. We've used that to develop some agency-wide metrics, looking at the performance within local health departments. So for the on-site program, one of the things we look at is whether we're able to have repairs completed within 60 days. That's a goal for the agency, that when we receive a repair application, that repair is installed and operations permit issued within 60 days. Also looking at O&M reporting for alternative systems. And again, Sunal mentioned workload. The link here, so I believe this presentation will be sent out, and if you click on this link, it just sends you to an example of a report that we provided to the General Assembly that has, I think, a really good example of how we were able to use the data from our database to create data visualizations. And so that's really, I think, where a really key part of this is that visualization aspect. So obviously you have, let's see if I can get the little green arrow to work here. So we have, obviously, maps. We're able to take that information within the database and create spatial information with that. Also trend analysis and being able to visualize that, and then also just general counts of how many types of applications that we received over a time period. And that all of that information can be really helpful. Certainly, as an agency, we're looking at ways that we can improve our metrics to go from more of just kind of a widget counting, which is, I think that's always a good first step. Just being able to find a useful means for the data, but transitioning it more to how do you measure impact that the program's having within the community or within the state. Another example, I don't have a photo here, but we recently applied for a grant within the state here to do some septic repairs, and we were able to use data from our database to identify active repair permits that were kind of shovel-ready projects to be able to help us in how much we requested in the grant, and then also being able to show the need for the grant. And so we haven't received that grant yet. It's still under review, but that data analysis was certainly helpful. Another question that I think comes up a lot anytime that you have a database, and it certainly comes up for us now that we have it from General Assembly and other stakeholders of, well, tell me how many systems you have. There's an expectation once you have that database, you have a complete inventory of systems. And unfortunately, we don't have that. We do have an estimate, and that estimate of about 1 million systems is just a little over 1 million systems statewide, is based on a number of factors. It's census data, so as many of you know, from 1990 and prior, there was census data collected on the number of homes that had an on-site system. And so for Virginia, that was 707,000 the last time that was collected in 1990. And then we also have over 200,000 systems that have been installed that are contained within our Venus database. But that leaves us with a gap because we started using the database in late 2002, 2003. So from 1990 to 2003, we have a gap in our knowledge, and so we have to estimate how many systems we believe were installed during that time frame, and that's how we come to our working estimate. But we are certainly working towards getting the complete inventory. Part of that is looking at different data sets that are available, local governments with real estate assessors or GIS databases, and being able to pull that information in. Maybe they won't be able to tell you the type of system or anything like that, but maybe they can at least start you with, these are the properties that don't have connection to public sewer but have an improvement. They have a house. We do have a fairly robust inventory of alternative systems in the state, and that was as part of our rollout with our regulations for alternative on-site sewage systems that started in 2009 timeframe. So we do have a fairly good handle on the number of alternative systems. And again, we do have some additional ongoing operation and maintenance requirements for those systems, which makes having a complete inventory of those very critical. And when you have that type of an inventory, so this is just an example from a locality in Virginia where we're able to break down the types of treatment units that were installed for alternative systems and map that out over across the locality and be able to visualize that. So certainly once you have that inventory, it provides a great tool for you, both internally and externally working with stakeholders.
So then we move to best practices and lessons learned. We have many lessons learned. What we are sharing today is just small fraction of it. So top two challenges with having a database of this size is buy-in from the users. We have users all across the state, and each district has their own challenges in terms of connectivity and hardware, software, all those kind of things, and so that sometimes gets a little frustrating for people to enter data because it takes forever, and that's something that it's not readily corrected, but that does affect how the database is used. And so understanding the system limitations and the database capabilities and limitations is the first step towards creating that buy-in, but it's very, very important. If you're starting new, or even if you already have a database, getting that awareness created is very critical. And then the second challenge is the balance between customization and standardization. In our case, because the local health districts do have some ability to customize the database to their district database to their needs, it offers, obviously it offers the flexibility that they desire, but at our end, from central office, it really poses a lot of challenges because when we try to pull data, it's everything is not recorded exactly the same way. And so we might miss a few things. Some things don't get captured, they are not labeled correctly, and all those kind of issues that plague any data analysis, but you have to be careful about balancing those two needs. Something else that is really important, which is fortunately not that big of an issue for us, sometimes we feel that it is, which is mandatory use of database. Because the way our state is structured, most of the health districts are kind of part of VDH. And so it's easy for people to use this central database. But if we had if some states that have different setup where each health district are independent entity, if you have a regulatory structure like that, then making the use mandatory would be challenging. But if you don't make the use mandatory for everybody to enter the data, actually kind of lose all the benefits that a database like this offers. So it's critical to have that mandatory use where everybody is entering data in the same system. Creating and maintaining standard user manuals, providing training, ongoing training, and those are critical aspects because we have workforce turnover, and that's the only way we can maintain data entry standards. One thing that we learned is that open text fields do not work well. While they are very easy to fill, and people feel very happy typing data because it's more tangible, it really doesn't work when you start doing data analysis. So drop downs is always the most preferred method, and correct configuration of data entry fields. Also, instead of just designating people who are interested in database stuff as somebody who can, make changes. That approach is good for that person who's interested, but again, from central maintenance and data integrity point of view, perhaps a better approach would be to create a more like a super user work group or something like that, those members are designated people who can make changes in central or district database, and that way you have a better understanding of the needs, evolving needs, and just what the data really means. So that kind of setup will help with better data analysis. And last, but probably most important, have a relational database, because you can't do a lot of analysis if you don't have a relational database. So based on this, I think Lance will take this.
Yes. Again, having a statewide database, Sanal mentioned it, Virginia, we are lucky with the setup that we have. Certainly some states are going to have a more difficult time with implementing that kind of a setup. But if you're able to establish that on a statewide level, that's certainly beneficial from that aspect. Incorporating data entry processes within policies or implementation of regulations, that's something that we've struggled with in Virginia of keeping up with. There's a lot of times there's a demand, you've got an emergency regulatory action, the General Assembly asks you to create some type of new process, and so you're rushing to create that implementation of that policy, and we're trying to do better with incorporating data entry into those policies and processes, but there's certainly more that we could do to improve on that. And so any way that you can incorporate that data entry into the front end of development of a regulation or a policy, the earlier you can incorporate that into the process, the better. And then being able to use standardized hard copy forms. If you've got paper forms owners are using where that's standardized, then that makes it easier to standardize the data that's collected.
And so with that, we are almost out of time and at the end of our presentation. So we are currently going through a database transition. So we are moving from Venus into a new enterprise cloud-based, browser-based system. We are currently in the process of designing the system. And so all the lessons learned that I listed out, we are trying to incorporate that into our new system. So again, this new system is, as far as management is concerned, it's going to follow similar setup as our Venus currently has. The transition management is done from central office Richmond, that is OEHS. We have asked for our user folks to be part of this process. And so we have about 65 transition team members from across the Commonwealth, across different districts, and they represent expertise on several different regulatory programs. And we routinely meet, not in person, but we set up go-to-meetings, Polycom, so we use technology to stay in touch and work collaboratively. That's an evolving process. It's a very exciting and challenging process. But we find that having a team, this transition team across all user groups is definitely beneficial because everyone brings a unique perspective about how they use the system and what their needs are. And we are able to incorporate that as we develop this new database. So that I think anytime you are developing any new system, having that input from users directly is really, really important. And our anticipated go-live date with this new database is April 29th. And with that, I don't know if we have much time left for questions, but questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Sonal. That was a very great presentation, and thank you, Lance, as well. Very impressive. We do have a couple of questions on the chat box, so I'll start reading them to you. Mary Clark from Sora says, do you permit processing standards? And Mary, you can unmute as well and clarify your question if you'd like as well. But I'll hand it over to Sonal.
Yeah, and if you could clarify that a little bit, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, sure. Hi, this is Mary Clark. Yeah, we have a standard from our legislature that says that we have to expedite our permits within a certain time period. Like, say, once the application's received, it's out the door in like 30 days or something like that. And then we report that to the legislature every year. What percentage have we met that standard?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yes, we have similar requirements within our regulations or within our state code. Depends on the type of system, but and we do have a statute within the Code of Virginia where we have to give the General Assembly a 5-year report, and that's part of the report. Timeliness of applications and things like that. So that's certainly part of our database, tracking that time and being able to report that to the General Assembly.
Great, thank you.
Great. Next question, Mr. Rubin says, you showed a variety of treatment technologies used in the Commonwealth. How is a system approved for use in Virginia?
So we have a number of levels of treatment in Virginia. So we have obviously septic tank effluent, but we also have what we call treatment level 2, which would be 3030 BOD TSS, and then we have what we call treatment level 3, which is 1010 BOD TSS. For TL2, the 3030, if it's an NSF 40 approved system, then we do recognize NSF for 3030 and also for nitrogen reduction. But then we also have a process within the state to receive approval for that 1010 process, where you go through providing us with some sample information, and I'd be happy to share some more detail on that directly with whoever had that question.
Great, and yeah, he did say thank you in the chat box as well. Great. Next question, how did you convince all jurisdictions, especially the ones that were already using their own, to use this database?
Oh, that's a great question. Short answer is you can't, but that doesn't mean that all hope is lost. So depending on how your relationship with these entities is, you can have several ways you can approach it. It may be like something formal like MOU, or you can build it in, if you are building a new system, if there is an option of building an interface that directly talks with their system, that's another way. And just good old meeting with people and just sharing what is in it for both sides and getting people on board. And that's where the buy-in part comes in. So there is no magic formula to it, but I think you have to keep working at it, and depending on what tools you have between your system and the setup, you kind of just have to keep trying new approaches till your needs are met. I know that's not a very great answer, but that's the reality of the world we live in.
Great. Okay, about 3 more questions. Was the on-site portion an add-on or already integrated into the environmental health database from the start? And do you have any estimates of cost to develop and maintain, the database?
So it was part of the program from the start, I believe. I think the development may have started with, maybe the food was the first rollout, but it was all part of a plan to have all of our environmental health programs within this single database. As far as the cost, I don't have any. Yeah.
So even when this Venus database was created, and with the new database as well, we have general funds that we are using. But to add to what Lance was saying, that the first time this database was created, it was a rollout of one module at a time. So it was always planned, but the development of all 14, 15 modules didn't happen all at once. So we had to kind of prioritize and roll out one program at a time. That's it.
Sorry, I was on mute. Next question, comment saying, impressive database system. Can you share more regarding how development of the tool was funded and how continuing maintenance is paid for, i.e. contractor?
And again, that is through general funds from the agency. I believe there is a portion of that from local health departments that comes into that, but it's general funds from the agency.
Great, thank you. And last question from Washington Department of Health, is the new cloud browser-based system with the same contractor?
So we ended up with the same contractor, but it was not by design. We had this whole standard, RFP process, and, the RFP went out, and several contractors, submitted their bid, and we had that whole process of vendors coming and presenting their solution, and then negotiations and all that good stuff. So we went through the entire process, and we did end up with the same contractor, but that was not the intent of the whole process. So in some ways, it's good that we did end up with the same contractor because the contractor knows current system, and so it makes it a little bit easier for the transition to happen, but it was not by design.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Virginia. That was a very informative presentation. We will move forward now due to time and introduce Florida. So we have Carrie Lowy as well as Eberhard Roeder from Florida. Carrie Lowy is a manager of information management with the Florida Department of Health, where she serves in various IT roles over the last 20 years. In 2006, she began working for environmental health, providing technology support for the on-site sewage treatment and disposal system section. And in 2013, she joined the environmental health application support team. She is currently the manager of that team. Eberhard Roeder is an environmental manager in the Florida Department of Health's on-site sewage program in Tallahassee. Since 2017, he has led the research and engineering subsection, which includes a research component, a statewide product review and approval component, and a technical assistance and outreach component. He started in the program in 2004 as a coordinator of the on-site sewage research program, and he is a professional engineer licensed in Florida. So with that, I will hand it over to Florida. And I'll pull up your presentation. There you go. So Kara and Ebra.
Good afternoon. This is Kara. Again, I'm with I manage the team that is responsible for supporting our current database application that houses all of our environmental health data. I'm going to go through a little bit the history of how we've been gathering data over the last 40 years, 50 years, and as well, and then do a little bit of, not quite a demo, but a walkthrough of our system as it is now. In Florida, we have more than 2 million on-site sewage systems. We have various ways that we know those numbers, and I'll get into that in a minute. The Florida Department of Health operates as an integrated agency, but we have presences in 67 county health departments. So there's an environmental health office that does on-site sewage work in all 67 health departments. Those health departments are responsible for the permitting and taking in the money and reviewing the systems as they're put in their local health department. But all of the information is reported centrally up here, and the central office deals with contractor registration and variances to the rule and the law, quality control, product approval, technical assistance, and as well as data tracking. And this map right here we're going to get into at the end about, I've got the arrow, about how we have estimation of where there's septic and sewer. Ed's going to talk about that a little bit later at the end. We started tracking just counts, number of systems that were being installed in the state of Florida. We started with the 1970 census, and from then we just started adding on that each health department would track their installations in a ledger, in a filing cabinet. They would do their work on paper forms and file them away, but they would take that ledger at the end of the year and send numbers up to the headquarters office so that we could track across the state how many systems were being installed. So every year they added on for each county how many systems were there. Ooh, hello, that was a link. And And then again in 1990, there was another census to verify that how many on-site systems there were in the state of Florida. But beginning in the early 1990s, some of the EH directors were really wanting to start moving towards tracking things on computers. And a couple of the EH directors started working on building databases in Visual FoxPro. So these were systems that were put together. They had a front end and a database back end, and the EH directors themselves or their staff were building these databases and using them to track in their own health department what was coming in. This spread from one county to the next, and soon headquarters heard about it, and then at some point towards the end of the 90s, we adopted this as something we would use across the whole state of Florida. It was still a decentralized system, so each health department on their own servers would run these databases. And the headquarters office would send out what they call pop files, which were sort of drop-down files with updated contractor lists, with new product lists. But it was up to the individual health department to install the information, to put that information into their system, to install any updates to the database, and as well to send up on an annual basis, or I think it was quarterly at that point, a quarterly basis, the information, some basic information on the systems that were being installed and the repairs that were being done. So this started giving us the ability to look at trends, to have some consistency in data, because we were asking the whole state of Florida to use the same system. But some of the health departments were using it only minimally in order to get the data up to headquarters. They were not really using it to track all of their permitting. And so we were trying to get to where there was consistency, but there was still quite a lot of inconsistency. So in the early 2000s, we started looking at what we could do to get a centralized system. They looked at trying to purchase a customized off-the-shelf product. They were not able to get a system in that fulfilled our needs. So in about 2005, they decided to build an in-house application, and it started rolling out in early 2007. They actually started this system with OSTDS and limited use water. OSTDS because it was considered to be the most complicated of the permitting programs, and so it was sort of a test case to see if they could get that system set up in the new application system, and if so, then they would move forward with the other modules. So we, again, started with OSTDS and limited use water, and then added modules and added counties as we could, pulling in all the data as much as possible from all the existing FoxPro databases and anything else that people, Excel spreadsheets people were keeping data in. As much as possible, we pulled that data into what we call the Environmental Health Database. Very, very creative name, Environmental Health Database. So this now allowed us to be able to store some of that public record data for public record requests. We could allow the CHDs to do their own permitting and inspection data entry, just as they'd always done it on paper, but they were keeping it in files. We would maintain here, and we still do, the product approval table, so when there was a product approval, we could update all those drop-downs directly. When there were new contractors, we could put those new contractors into the drop-downs. It allowed for better consistency of data. Again, no text fields anymore. Things as much as possible were moved to drop-downs. We were able to put in place the system sizing calculations. For the most part, are all in the system, so most systems should be automatically calculated to the right size, and there just is a verification process with that. And again, workload monitoring, because now we know how many systems are going in. We know at any given time how many new systems are being installed and how much work is being done by the staff. And more detailed trend tracking so we can get better sense of the trends. We have, for several years now, I think, 20 more years, had a couple statewide, department-wide measures for the OSTDS program. So there's a goal of less than 3 failures per 1,000 systems, and a premature failure, well, I guess it's premature failures, right? Less than 2 years. So again, we can over many years track what our failure rates look like because we have all the data in the same system. And average days to issue new permits, so this is another measure that we have. For new permits, is less than 8 days. I think it's much shorter for new repairs, rather. 3 days, maybe? I can't remember right now. And again, over time, we can look at how many new systems are being installed. You can see our trend and then our drop, our rise and then our drop with the real estate market, and then the same with repairs. So there's a lot of information that's being tracked in here. I think rather than going through these things in the interest of time, I'm just going to do a walkthrough of the system, and I'll show you as we go through how things are being tracked. So I'm going to switch over to my application here.
Great. And Kara, I remember you would like to take questions as you go, so we do have a question on the chat box from Christina Heinemann in Region 2. How is failure manifest, surface ponding, frequent pump outs, etc.? Christina, Christina, do you mind clarifying your question?
I think the question is clear. I think for us it is if somebody comes in with an application for a repair permit, that would then constitute something that we would look at. So if somebody doesn't come in, they never enter the system, so that would make it harder to track it.
And the failures, there's various failure conditions that we record, and it includes ponding, it includes various different things. Sometimes it can be someone having parked on top of the system. So there's lots of failure conditions that we record as we do a repair. Let's see, where is my document that I wanted to look at? Sorry. So this is our main entry screen. This is a test environment, so I'm going to be clicking around, but it's not going to touch any live data. Again, as was shown by Virginia, we have all of our different modules here. So for all the different EH programs that we're tracking through the system, I'm going to go ahead and pull up one that I know about. Our screens throughout the system really reflect what our paper forms looked like in the past. So we're, as much as possible, recording all the information that is included in on those forms. Okay. So the application includes what it's an application for, so a repair or a new or an abandonment. We also have the option to put in from the beginning an indicator that this is a performance-based system or an innovative system. There's the applicant information and the agent, so an agent can act on the part of the applicant with contact information for that person. The property information includes many different ways that you can record the property, lot block subdivision, section township range, your property ID. You can see throughout the system there will be some required fields that have a little asterisk next to them, and there are also some fields that are in blue. Those blue fields are used later on in the system calculations for the permit. Property address information, including GIS information and directions. Information here is used to determine the flow. So you can add in additional buildings, and it will increase the flow. You can add in additional building types, commercial building types, and they each have their own little set of boxes that will add to the flow. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. I think I'm going to delete this. I'm just not going to save it. And we have different sizing for commercial and residential. So we have residential size flow and we have commercial flow. And if anything on that system is commercial, it is sized as a commercial system. As you go through, you would go ahead and say, go to new site evaluation. I just want to show you the one that's in here, so I'm not going to click that button. The site evaluation allows you to record information about your flow and your authorized sewage flow for your property. These, all of the fields on the left are ones that are calculated by the system, but there is the ability to override those numbers if there's an actual number which is different. For instance, the net usable area available may be lesser than what is just purely the acreage. There's benchmark information, setback information, so you can record how far your setbacks are, and then flooding information for that property. So this is all the site evaluation. You're going out to the site and looking at the conditions of that site. Here you could do your borings or soil profiles. We have 2 profiles that you can record on a single site evaluation, and it allows for data entry of across the numbers. So here we have from 40 inches to 72 inches, there was this brownish yellow sandy clay loam. But also within the middle of that, from 48 to 60 inches, was this other layer. So you can do an overlap, and that's just a way to record all the information about that boring that you did. And then on the last page, again, we have some blue fields that are going to be used in our calculations: an estimated wet season water table elevation and observed water table, and then how it is that you determined what that estimated wet season water table elevation was. Soil replacement information, and then as we go through and we say we're going to base our system sizing on a particular soil texture, and it's going to have a particular configuration and depth or type, that determines the loading rate. Those things together determine what the loading rate is and therefore the size of the drain field. So that's the site evaluation, and then from there you would go to issuing a permit. The permit, again, has a couple questions at the top when you come in that you're going to answer that are going to help determine the sizing of the system for the permit. The system will calculate a number, that's the ones here in blue, but they can be overridden if for some reason there's a known reason for it to need a larger tank or larger drain field. Those numbers can be changed. Most of the things on this permit can be. It just calculates automatically for you. And then, of course, there's a big comments box to put lots of information in about that system, and information about who provided the specifications on the site evaluation and who approved it. And there's some security on that where only the person logged in who is also certified can put their name in that box, so that we know that that person is reviewing that permit before it is being issued. We have dates here. We talked about the days to issue. We have date issued, we have ready to issue date, we have a permit complete date if you saw it on the first, application complete date that was on the first page. So we have these extra dates in there to sort of stop the clock if for some reason an application comes in but it isn't complete. The clock doesn't start until that application is complete, and then the number isn't calculated. It's calculated only until you're ready to issue it, not until the person actually comes in to pick it up. Then we have our inspection documents. So this particular record had a construction inspection and then a final inspection. They use the same form, and as you can see, there's a whole bunch of things that are measured. There's this section is on the tank itself and how it was installed. Each of these items has a compliance status. It also has, most of them have a number or a value you can record as well. So this legend number here is an identifier of the actual tank that is installed. There's drain field information. Again, what size drain field ended up being installed. What was the system, was the system location where it was supposed to be? Was the elevation okay? Here's the fill section, which is not always used. So this has a not applicable for this. On the second page, again, we have setbacks, information on a fill or mound system. The system did not need that. And then some other information here, including the contractor who installed it, stuff about the building area, alarms, lots of other information, an abandonment section if there was an abandonment in conjunction with the installation or the repair. and then the approval information. This was a construction inspection, which was approved, but it was not yet connected, so they had to come back later for the final approval. And again, the final approval can be created directly from this document, and so then you just go through and you fill out the things that still needed to be completed and final that system. So that is OSTDS construction. Does anyone have any questions about that? I kind of went through it fast.
Yes, there is a question on the chat box. Is field data uploaded on site or back in the office?
It is all done in the office right now. We do not have an on-site. Our mobile app does not include OSTDS construction at this point. Oh.
Great. And comment from Mary Clark said, wow, this is incredible detail. Are all of these data fields used in analysis or reporting? Seems like it might take 30 minutes to enter.
So again, these are various steps along the way. So each document comes in at a different time and it's recorded at a different time. Yes, it is very, very detailed. I can't say all of them are used, but we have certainly used some of the more esoteric ones from time to time. You might not think, we did one about loading rate at one point. And so it is a mechanism by which we can look at anything and track anything. Much of that information is used for calculating the permit. Certainly the setbacks. As you go through the system, if you've said the setback is too small, it will throw up an error saying, hey, you know you're violating the setback. And so it's a tool to help people make sure they're installing their systems correctly. Okay, and of course we always rely upon the inspector to know what the rules are, but it's a little bit of a guide. So I don't know, I was going to show, maybe I'll just show that one, the screenshot with the operating permits that we have. Let's see. Anything else anyone wants to see in that before I move back over to my presentation? Okay.
One more question. Do you still have the master contractor program, and how do they enter completion data?
That was a good question. We do still have the master contractor program. There is I'm going to switch back real quick. There is a page called a repair certification page. And that repair certification has a subset of the information that will then be put onto the final inspection. It's not letting me click it right now, but there's another page that has a subset of the same information that's going to be on that final. So whatever we're going to end up measuring that final inspection off of is recorded on that certification page, and it is sent in on paper, and we record it into the system. Drawing site plans are not currently included. They can be uploaded. There is a manage documents feature which allows people to upload documents, so they could upload them and attach them. Otherwise, they're still having to keep those either in their own document management system or in the file cabinet. Are there error messages that automatically pop up when information is miskeyed? Dates, yes. There's a few things where that's true. So like date fields, many, as Virginia talked about, State of Virginia talked about, we tried as much as possible to go to drop down, so you can't miskey a drop down. But if you put in a date that's in the past or way in the future, I guess. I'm trying to think of. There's certain dates that you can't have an application come in the future. So those kinds of things would pop up with an error message. So yes, we've tried to incorporate that. Not too much hand-holding, but just enough, as much as possible. I see one more question is coming in. So yes, Kevin, you could include photos for the site. Again, that can be uploaded through the managed docs. What size systems do we handle?
It's, by statute, it's up to 5,000 gallons per day commercial and 10,000 gallons per day domestic sewage. And if it's larger than that, it would go to the Department of Environmental Protection. Within those sizes, all of the permits get issued by the county health departments. They might sometimes ask for technical assistance for the larger systems, but there is no separation like some other states have where the bigger and smaller get treated differently.
So I included in this presentation screenshots just so when you do upload if you upload the PowerPoint, people will be able to see what those pages look like, but I wanted to show it live. This is just some screenshots of our operating permits. We require annual or biannual, every 2-year operating permits for certain advanced systems or commercial IM zone systems. So we have basic entity information, which is, name, owner and address, and dates of the permitting. It includes, let me do my arrow. Inspection frequency, when the last inspection was, information about billing. So this is just sort of the business office portion of what needs to happen. Then for the operating permits, there's all the details of that particular permit. This information here at the top all comes over from that from the construction permit. Here we have some ATU information about the number of maintenance visits required, the active service agreement with the maintenance entity, some information about the tank, the system itself, and who the maintenance entity is. There are various kinds of operating permits, so like the commercial and the IM would include information about what's happening at that location, what the business is at that location, and performance-based looks very similar to the aerobic. Can permits be applied for online? Not today, no. We allow for renewals of the operating permits. We do not allow for new applications at this point. That's something we're hoping to get with our new system when that comes on. So service, OSGDS service is all of the businesses that operate around on-site sewage systems. So we have septic disposal, we have manufacturers of tanks, we have temporary system service, we have maintenance entities, and we have disposal facilities. We no longer have land sites. Again, this is just the details of what is recorded for that. There's information about the vehicles that are used. There's information about where the waste can be treated, what tanks are being manufactured at a location, what kinds of system an ME can service. So lots of information that are very specific and specific to that particular business, that particular service business. We are working on just releasing now a maintenance entity reporting system, which will allow for some more direct connection between reports that are put in by maintenance entities on these advanced systems and EHD itself, so those will be visible from EHD. Here's what it looks like in EHD. This is the screen from an operating permit. They can click on Manage Activities, and it will show a list of all of the activities. Let me get my arrow again. And they can click the Interactivity button, and it brings up a simple data entry screen showing who did the service, what date, why, what the service was, what the service type and reason was, what the outcome of that was, and a statement about what happened. Also, a number of samples taken if samples were taken. From the internal side of the So the MARS application, Maintenance Activity Reporting System application, is an external system. Everything else we've seen so far is internal to our agency. So this now becomes an external application, and again, there's the ability for someone to look at all the maintenance agreements they have, the ability for them to record the information about those maintenance agreements, and the activities that they're performing against those maintenance agreements. So we do not at this point have a way to record the results directly into MARS. They would have to be uploaded. So there's a document upload feature here. So the results, or I should say here, because that's where the activity is. The results could be uploaded there and then be available. So that is what I was going to cover. As I said, let me talk a little bit about where we are with the COTS application. We are in the middle of a competitive bid process to obtain a vendor-built system to replace our current system. Our system is 11 years old and is showing its age. And we would like to get more flexibility and more integration with some of the other systems that we have. So we are in the middle of that process. I can't talk too much about it, but that is, we were able to get some funding from the CDC, ASTER, did I say that right? Yeah, to replace our system. So we have a grant to spend on that. Yes, the MARS data entry would be, ideally would be entered directly by the management, by the maintenance entity, or their business, their office. That is the idea and the concept. We have the ability to do that data entry from within EHD for those that have sent in paper records in the past, or continue to do that. The preference would be to let the maintenance entities do that directly.
And there was a question what happens to the samples taken, and the MARS system would allow the results to be entered.
They have to be uploaded at this point.
Uploaded.
Yeah, as an attachment.
So that would be the way to communicate that to the health department. So I'm giving essentially, I think, a flyover over this project, the Florida Water Management Inventory, which aimed to map OCDS and also well data. Particularly, I want to acknowledge Elke Urson, whose team spearheaded this effort. While the environmental health database is a largely permitting-driven database, this one is more meant to provide more general information. So if you come to any particular parcel, you don't know necessarily what is there. You could think of three possible options: that you have either on-site wastewater and private wells, that you have central sewer and public water, and you could have cluster systems with something in between. As the project was implemented, it became just the two classifications: either on-site, which is what is permitted by the Department of Health, as I mentioned before, the 5,000, 10,000 gallons per day for on-site systems, or central sewer and public water, which would be something permitted by under the rules of the Department of Environmental Protection. So the project goal was to have one data repository where all the drinking water and wastewater treatment information, at least in these broad categories, is available for every built property in Florida. So the approach then is to run for each parcel through an assessment. If there's a building on it, that would come from we get data from the Department of Revenue, which then has the improvement on there. Then we would look for drinking water source information by whoever can give it to us, public water or private wells. Similarly, the wastewater treatment method, either central sewer or on-site wastewater. That is where the permitting database comes in pretty handy, because then for the last 15 years or so, we have the permit data for on-site wastewater. And then there is variations on how sure we can be that the information that we have can definitely tell us what it is. So we distinguish between known, likely, and somewhat likely for each of these. Oh, sorry. Okay. So illustrates this approach. Initially, we have parcel data and assign a build status. Then we compile drinking water and wastewater from various sources. That's where most of the work was, to get various sources to share that with us. Based on that information, we assign the drinking water and wastewater values to those parcels, and then we have that information and can make maps and various reports from that. The left map is something that Kara already showed in the beginning. So we have wastewater disposal, which shows that in the cities, largely sewer. Out more in the rural areas, it's largely septic. On the right side, you see the drinking water. Again, in the city, you have largely public water, and then more in the rural areas, you get more private wells. With all this data, then you can make various graphs too. These are some donuts. On the outside is the wastewater, and inside is the drinking water. In both cases, most parcels are served by centralized facilities. For on-site wastewater, about 25% are known or likely septic, with 10% roughly unknown. And for the drinking water, about 10% are known or likely private wells, with 17% unknown. And so this project, there was one precursor in 2009, and then I think for the last 4 years this has been going on. And the goal is, so during every iteration, the number of unknowns should become fewer. A couple of other results, how you can graph this. This shows how these sewer or wastewater and drinking water combine. Most parcels have sewer and public water. You have also quite a few that have septic and public water, a few fewer with septic and on-site wells, and then very few with sewer and on-site wells. And one possibility is that this is where some data are either conflicting or still missing, and this might actually be rarer than it's showing up here. Mm-hmm. There's also a web application where you can look for particular parcels that shows you the county when the last time was that this information was updated. It has information on where this information was coming from. So for this one here, it shows you the construction permit number. And then for the drinking water, it shows you that the drinking water utility provided that information. This data has been used by a few people and as part of projects. So this was one more from an environmental epidemiology perspective to map which water systems provide which parcels with water. So if that water has certain characteristics, that can be then used in an exposure assessment. Used it a couple of times in emergency preparedness situations. This is a mapping of the coast, and so depending on if this is on-site or central sewer, if somebody calls about sewage on the street, you would get a better sense of where to send them to or who should take a look at that. There's another example, in this case, drinking water wells. This looks at low-lying areas. So which wells could you expect to be flooded by the, in this case, storm surge at the St. John's River? And so it would give you a sense of how many wells might come in to get their water, their well water tested, or where you should check up if they are okay by now. The data has also been used by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to estimate nitrogen load contributions, particularly for springs. This shows one of the springs in central Florida that in a county that is very heavily reliant on septic systems. So you can get a sense of how many there are, and then that works for load assessments. Depending on density or other geographic features, you can identify high priority areas. And DEP has identified what they call priority focus areas, and that can help then to select remediation methods for the basin management action plans to reduce nitrate in the springs. As Kara mentioned, in terms of the future for EHD and MARS, we are looking for developing the supply replacement system for what we have right now, the Florida water management inventory. The main challenge is that the funding so far has been cobbled together from here and there, so finding a sustainable and sustained funding source is important. Otherwise, continued improvement on the data would be the next steps, and eventually also to create a way to put these data back into EHD instead of just getting data out of EHD. I think that covers what I had to say. So, any further questions?
Amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Kara and Eb. We will be moving forward on to Minnesota's presentation. So Minnesota, we have Cody Robinson. Cody Robinson is a soil scientist in the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Septic Systems Policy and Planning Unit in St. Paul, Minnesota. He's been working there since 2016. Cody specializes in technical administrative assistance, soils training, and registration of proprietary treatment and distribution products. Cody also collects, analyzes, and organizes statewide septic system data in addition to developing the Septic System Annual Report. Cody received his Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Studies from St. Cloud State University in St. Cloud, Minnesota. So Cody, I will hand it over to you, and I will pull up your presentation.
All right, well, thank you, Gaida. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So, yeah, like Gaida mentioned, my name is Cody Robinson. I work for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency here, and one of the big things that I do is kind of the septic system data management. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen in today. One heads up in advance, I'll apologize. I'm going to move through some of these slides kind of fast, but I made this PowerPoint to kind of serve as a resource for you guys. So anybody looking into some of these data collection methods, can ask for the slides later on, and I believe Gaida will provide them. But I'll jump right into it, and just got to get control. There we go. So the first one, some important acronyms to jump into that I won't be able to avoid. Obviously, I'm going to try to use some standardized terms, but SSTS is Subsurface Sewage Treatment System, so that's for our septic. You might see it SSTS over, and then LGU is Local Governmental Unit, so that's kind of the cities, townships, counties, or local permitting authorities. So the LGUs are our respondents. And a little bit more background here, so kind of our septic system regulations, they'll be referenced. They're here, you can click on and look into, but we have 4 chapters in Minnesota rules. The first 2, 7080 and 7081, are prescriptive standards, technical standards, criteria for systems between up to 10,000 gallons per day. 7082, that's a little bit more of the bigger regulation that pertains to this, which is our local program regulations, and some of the regulations in there will include things like record-keeping requirements as well as their reporting requirements to us. So I'll be talking about that a little bit. And then the last one's just our SSTS credentialing. It's our licensing and product registration as well. Some of the overview here, what I'm going to go over, starting with at the beginning, is our government permitting structure, just a little bit more background on Minnesota's program, their responsibilities, and the individual questions that we ask for in their reporting. I'll talk about the web-based data collection, our old method versus new. Minnesota, actually, we do have a statewide database that we've been kind of rolling out. It's called Tempo, but it has not made it to the septic system program at this time. So I'm going to talk about our methods that we kind of do in-house here to collect statewide septic system data. And then process management and organization, I'm going to talk about this new survey process that we developed here, as well as how kind of our database looks like, and then communicating our data to the public and how we get that information out through our annual report, and then using data for planning purposes. So starting with our local structure, like I said, a little bit of the background here is state of Minnesota, we have been tasked by the legislature to develop a set of minimum standards criteria, and those technical standards, like I mentioned, are in 7080 and 7081. We also administer the standards in 7082 that talks about what local units of government need to have and then credentialing. So how the program actually gets implemented is like probably many states around the country that, the local unit of government runs the permitting structure. They do the review, they do the inspections, things like that. But ultimately, they're required in our rules to adopt and implement a local program via local ordinance. So they can be more restrictive than state standards, but they cannot be less. So that they're required to have it, and then their ordinance applies to all their land area in the county. Cities, townships, and others, they're more of an optional program, so they don't have to have a permitting program, an inspection program. But if they choose to, they're allowed to. And then their ordinance would have to be as strict as the county standards, and then they operate their own as they wish. So then the ordinances that for them apply as well to their local jurisdictions. So our total respondents, at least for 2017, the total is to 218. We have 86 counties that report to us, 85 of those city programs under the counties and then townships. The other are kind of those local co-ops, or we have some joint power boards, some local sewer permitting districts that are the other programs. So subpart 5 here, this comes directly from 7082, and this is really the rule that requires local programs to submit a report, an annual report to the commissioner or the agency. The report must be submitted by February 1st. 7082, like I mentioned, also goes deep into the things that they have to collect and the record keeping that they have to do to maintain some of this stuff. But this is the primary piece that requires that they have to report to the agency. And then, so that piece actually, and I should mention, it talks about items that they must report, so it'll go into more detail about things that they have to, that are mandatory. We asked for some more questions than that, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to go through the questions that we do ask. Some of these are mandatory, some of these are just things that we'd like to collect so we can get a better understanding of what's going on. But these first three, these are the first kind of yes or no questions. They pertain to alternative local standards, which are some acceptable deviations for low population density. But then we ask kind of a little bit about maintenance tracking, jurisdiction-wide compliance inspections for property transfer. This is a big data point that we get questions on all the time. Do you approve SSTS before issuing a permit, and when in the permitting process do they verify soils? Next is some of our figures. So these are permitting numbers. We ask for both residential and other establishment. Number of permits issued separated by type of systems. So our type 1 systems are kind of your conventional systems, in-ground rock trenches, mounds, that kind of thing. Type 2 permits are privies, holding tanks, floodplain. Type 3 are some acceptable deviation systems for systems that are for tough sites or difficult things. And then type 4 is our advanced treatment systems using technology. And then type 5 is systems that require an engineer sign-off. And we also break it down, systems going in the ground each year by residential and other establishment, and then new and replacement by flow. So those are all these questions. Permits issued for repairs, and then as well as jurisdiction-wide SSTS questions. So these are full-time dwellings. These are where we get our overall numbers. Seasonal dwellings, cluster systems, those community systems, dwellings served by those cluster systems, and then other establishments, so the commercial systems as well. Compliance, we do ask for, we ask for this one as estimated, so estimated percentage of those systems that are failing to protect groundwater, and then estimated percentage of systems that are imminent threats to public health and safety. Failing to protect groundwater is typically tank leakage or not enough separation. Imminent threats are those surfacing systems, straight pipes, things of that nature. We also ask for estimates of compliance systems. The next one is number of systems inspections for existing that are done each year. The next three are mitigated, so systems that are kind of discontinued in how that's being done. We also ask for the counties only of the listing of those cities, townships, and other programs that are under their jurisdiction, and that's what I use to develop a respondents list kind of year after year. We obviously know our counties, but cities and townships, they're you know, kind of changing. Sometimes they give them up, sometimes they take on a new program, so we can monitor that there. Inspector information is basically all their contact information. That changes from year to year, so we get the update there. We also ask for their inspector's license number, certification numbers. And then the last one is the tank installation report. So Minnesota does a $25 tank fee for every tank that goes in the ground. We actually invoice the contractors themselves for those tank fees, but we use this report to collect data back from the local units of government to verify that that is in fact how many tanks went in each jurisdiction. So that's kind of the tail end of the report. So moving into, like I mentioned, our old method and new method of data collection. So this old method, it was pretty clunky. You're probably going to hear me talk about it in a little bit more of a pessimistic tone because it was difficult and very time consuming for us, but in all reality, this could be a viable method used by some of the states around the country who have a smaller number of respondents or local units of government. So it really involves sending out or developing an individual spreadsheet for each entity, sending them out individually with the instructions in an email, and then they fill out the spreadsheets and then send them back to us individually, to which we have to take all that data and consolidate it into one spreadsheet for storage and analysis. So this is what that spreadsheet looks like. We still actually follow this spreadsheet to a T. We wanted to make it transitional to our new method, so all the questions are the same. They're actually presented in the same order on our new method, but this is what it looks like in the bottom there, and it's kind of small to see, but you can see we have 4 tabs. The first is just the general permitting numbers. Next tab is their inspector information or their contact information. Third one is those jurisdictions for the counties, and the last one is the tank report. So the next set of slides I'm going to roll through just to have them provided on here for you, but you can see it's moving from left to right, so it's kind of a long spreadsheet. The first thing I'll point out though is that red blank. We highlighted the entire row red for each reporting year so that it kind of encouraged them to fill in the blanks. But using this method, a disadvantage is we can't really control what they do fill out. At least in this case, they just left those 2 questions blank, so we didn't get the data on this one on this year. So these are all kind of those numbers filled in, going down the list for those other establishments by type, residential other establishment by flow. And I think in a lot of the cases they just leave them blank if it was 0, but again, it's difficult for us to make that distinction on our end. But they were assumed to be 0 when they leave them blank like that. These are some more numbers on repairs. These are the big numbers of what kind of, how many systems they have broken down. And then compliance estimated percentages. Another one there too is you notice they put unknown. So I mean they didn't know it at that time, and so that was the best they put in. So they've gotten better now, but it's just a point in these spreadsheets that you can't really control what gets entered in. And then the last is the new questions, so those kind of how they were mitigated, how many inspections took place. The next tab here is kind of our inspector information, so this is where they enter their contact information, email, all that sort of thing. The next tab, this example, Lake County actually doesn't have any local units of government underneath them, but if they did, they would be listing those out here. And then the last one is the tank report. So we had all the contractors that frequently did work in their area already embedded in the report, and they would just fill in the numbers to those. And then for new contractors who did work in their areas, they used the green function, and we had kind of a V lookup where they would just type in their license number and it would automatically load, and they would enter how many tanks they put in. So that's the old method. Like I mentioned, it was some of the downsides is it's really time consuming, difficult to manage with the high volume of local units of government. But going into this new method, which we were able to get up and running this year in 2017, we used it and it worked out really well, and it cut out a lot of time and overall turnaround on our annual report. But you can see here some of the main advantages to this is that increased data accuracy validation. So, with data accuracy, we can provide detailed instructions on each one, on each data point where they know exactly, they're well informed of what they're putting in. Validation is that, for those ones where they put unknown or they leave it blank or they put a number way out of range, This system, it's using the SNAP survey software. It makes sure that they're putting in things in our range, or that's if it's a phone number, it's in the phone number form. If it's a date or something, it's in that form. But either way, it just makes it more streamlined when we're trying to organize and manage our data. More representative in that it requires all data fields to be entered for them to move on to the next page. So they, when they're typing in, if they skip something, it won't let them move on. So they actually have to enter all the data fields, and we make it, or all the required ones they need to put in order to even submit the report. So more representative, and then that process efficiency. And I'm going to talk about the process with the SNAP survey software a little bit, but yeah, overall it just increased our turnaround time and ability to collect this data by a long shot. So this is when they get and I'll just touch on it, they get an email that has a link embedded in the email. They click on it, it brings them to this is the first page of the questionnaire, and like I said, it's got instructions. They move on to the next. The first page is that contact information. Like I mentioned, we could put instructions, detailed instructions. In this case, we were able to put definitions of who the SSTS program contact is, who their inspector is, who the department head is, just to really clarify what it is we're trying to collect. Data seeding is another beneficial function of the SNAP survey software, where in this case, actually, all this data was automatically in the survey when they got to this page. So I'll show you that spreadsheet, but it just makes it a lot easier. If the information changes, they can make those changes, but for the information that doesn't change very frequently, such as addresses, things like that, it's already in there. Another thing I'll point out is at the bottom right-hand corner. We made this transition to the SNAP survey for our LGUs, and to make it a little bit easier, we were able to put contact information, right on each page. So if they had an issue, they were able to call me. I could answer their question on the spot, and it made the transition go a little bit better. So these are the first three. I'm going to kind of run through these a little bit more quickly, but the same questions in the same order as that spreadsheet from before. I actually do encourage local units of government to follow that spreadsheet order, or to actually keep their spreadsheet and maintain their data year long. Some of them don't have very sophisticated technologies to do so, so they can use that spreadsheet, keep numbers up to date in there, and actually just use it in conjunction with this to send the data to us. This is an example as if they didn't put in a field that it wouldn't let them move on to then do so, but some more yes or no questions. We got permits by type, like I mentioned, and these are just data, entry fields that they put in the numbers. New systems, replacement systems. This is another piece of that validation, in which if there's an unrealistic number, such as 10,000 permits, issued for this entity, it wouldn't make sense, so it would kick it back and say enter a valid number. So different things like that. Number of full-time. So they're just kind of working their way through the report here. This is another piece too, is where we ask for their estimated percentage of compliant systems. And in this case, we said 8% failing to protect groundwater, 5% imminent threats. It actually has a totalized function, and where it makes sure that it adds itself up to 13 in the bottom box there. And that number in the bottom is required to be 100 for them to move on. So it ensures that we get our full 100% picture when reporting compliance, which is an issue that we had in the past as well. Some more here is those mitigated properties, inspector information, and then the last piece here is our tank report. So that's kind of the end of the survey. Once they fill out those numbers and put the information in, I should mention that we added links in here so they can have our tool that we use to look up license number. They can have it right embedded in the survey. And then this is the last page they'll get to. So once they finish that up, they're allowed to print their report. They can save, and then they can submit the report on the spot. And once they hit submit, all the data that they just typed in comes directly to us to export into an Excel database. So that's what I'm going to get into now is the process management, and I'm going to be talking about this SNAP software a little bit more in depth. Anybody can really, you buy the software from SNAP Survey. I don't believe it's too much. I don't know the information on the prices off the top of my head, but I believe it's reasonable, and it's something that just a tech-savvy person can learn how to develop and manage pretty easily. So Process management, data organization. This is the first one. So this is the email invites. The email in the back left there is the one I created, and I can enter things in and say, hello, and then I put in the inspector information. Well, that pulls from our seeded database, and it individualizes each email so they actually see their name when they get their email that comes in. But like I mentioned, it has the link right there, as well as some instructions. This is just a quick look at the kind of web platform that comes with Snap Survey software. So this is where I go to manage all the data that's being worked. On the left side, you see all the emails. It talks about it's their entity. The green check marks are if it tells me about if an email bounces, which happens somewhat frequently as emails change. If it's a red X, then I'll know that they didn't receive the email. I can easily change it right here in this platform and resend it to just that person. I can also monitor progress, who's completed the report, who's in progress, who hasn't even opened it, and I can kind of cater my assistance that way as well. These are the automated reminders. So it's kind of difficult to read here, but on the top left email is my initial email. The second email is we had some difficulties with the tank reporting. It's kind of a mistake on my end, but to answer that, we were able to throw in an update and change the text so then the reminders would answer their questions ahead of time to kind of keep down the call volumes. The one on the right is for those that were overdue. We can kind of have a little bit more direct language in there to try to get that information back to us a little bit more promptly. But you can develop these reminders way ahead of time, set a schedule. You can do it weekly, you can do daily, however you want to set it. So that's a pretty unique feature. And then just into the database. So like I mentioned, we as a program kind of manage this at this time. We're not quite integrated into the state database, but I like working with Excel and I like having the information on hand. So the first here is you can see this is a master database at the bottom. There's a number of tabs that go down the line, but this first one is the seed data. So every time I get a new set of data export, I'll copy and paste all that information and slap it right back into here, and that's going to develop my new respondent list for next year. And the right side has kind of their contact information, and I can set that column as where it pulls the emails from. So that's the seeded database. My data export, it's really nice. It's all uniform. It all comes in the same exact way. That data validation really helps out. But we have this filtered in various ways. And the one being, I know every LGU that submitted their report as well as the county that they reside in. And what I do with that is I take that information. Not only I do some analysis in this database to get individual information, but to develop the annual report, I'll actually consolidate the information by county. And that'll come in, and then I can, get my totals, and get all my figures all in one spot to do that analysis to develop our annual report and have the data accessible on hand. So this is a piece with the data export as well as you can create custom ones. So on this, I wanted to have a spreadsheet that had all the contact information all in one place, so I could send it out. I could, look it up fairly quickly. But it's just you can have customized data exports that puts it into different places, which is also a nice feature. So going on to communicating our data to the public, so basically I've been talking about this annual report we write every year. This is just kind of an example, and I put the link in there, so if you want the slides, but it's published on our website, available to the public. It has all these nice visuals in there that talks about our data. It helps communicate it, but it also, in the report, and this is kind of a picture of kind of the first 8 pages, but it's descriptive, it's narrative as well, and that kind of helps get into, explaining this data so it's not misinterpreted, but ultimately what we're doing is communicating it out. The audience of this report includes state legislatures, local units of government, our contractors, our professionals, citizens, homeowners, real estate agents. I refer a lot of people to this annual report for information. Some things we have in the report too is these maps here. You can use a GIS platform to put the data right in. We include these maps in the annual report to allow local units of government to kind of see what their neighbors are doing, see where they stack up, see how they're doing. We can put in total systems, a number of existing system compliance inspections, put in, and this is a good one, is the compliance inspections as a % of systems in the county, so we can see kind of, as a heat map in the state of where some of the more inspections are taking place, and things like that. Last one is, this is just another example of an image or of an illustration, is the summary of new systems that went in, replacements, and then what happened with discontinued. So this is all found in the annual report. I didn't really include a whole lot of data in here, but I figure if anybody wants to look up SSTS annual report on Google, and you can see all of our data from 2017, and it's got historical data in there as well. The last one is using our data for planning purposes. So this is kind of the big one that I'd refer to, is what we have is called an LGU assessment questionnaire. So this is something that we developed. It's basically got 7082 on this page. It's a multiple page document as a checklist. And we use this questionnaire, and we actually go around and we do assessments with LGUs, not only to make sure that they're meeting all the minimum requirements, but to also assist them in developing a more effective program. And we prioritize these assessments using sometimes data from the annual report, which, for those LGUs who did not submit annual report, that can put them on a priority list, as well as if they indicate that they're not verifying soils or issuing permits without conducting review, we can, focus there to help them out, as well as prioritize based on program size. It's kind of the data will set you free mindset, and everything about program size we can look at to see who to prioritize these assessments and provide assistance there. The other piece is really just trend analysis. I just kind of put this up for example, but really the point is, data overall, it creates strong strategies, enables programs to optimize your methods, quantify purpose of their work, provide needed backing to justify regulatory decisions. It's just having data is really effective. Another example I would throw out is, recently we were working with our communications team to try to get a more comprehensive web platform for the septic program. And in doing that, in kind of those negotiations, we're able to quantify our program and say we have 537,354 estimated systems in the state, serving 1.4 million Minnesotans, or 25% of the population, over 10,870 commercial facilities, ultimately discharging 36.8 billion gallons to the groundwater per year. So being able to quantify that stuff actually helped us achieve that notoriety from our communications department and get a better website to help our customers. So, like I mentioned, I kind of went pretty fast, but like I said, I'm available. You've got my email right there. If you'd like to get in touch with me and ask me any further questions, I'd be more than willing to help you out. But additionally, like I mentioned, this PowerPoint should be available upon request. So, any questions?
Great. Thank you so much, Cody. That was really informative. We do have a couple of questions. One, do you track construction permits separate from operation or installed permits?
Yeah, well, so construction permits in the sense of new systems going in, yes, we track them individually by type. And then if you're talking operating permits, as far as, operating permits to continual compliance type thing, we ask for those numbers and they report them separately, but ultimately they are managed at the local level.
Great. Second question, do you use a reply or a receipt request to make sure that addresses receive emails, especially those requesting data or reports?
Yeah, so they, I'm not sure exactly if SNAP has that capability to send them a receipt email. I'd have to look into that. We don't currently do that. I did get a number of emails come in just asking, hey, just wanted to verify you received the report, and I, responded to them promptly. I did have a number of people. One issue I can bring up with this is that there's a number of people that never printed their report. They just hit submit right away. And then I actually had to pull up their report and then send it back to them. So that took up a little bit of time. It wasn't too big of a deal, but that was kind of one way. But I think a lot of them actually use the print function and kind of maintain their report.
Great. Thank you, Kevin, for your comment. We appreciate that you learned a lot from this presentation. Next question was, what opportunities do you see for the future? I'm guessing in terms of data improvement, or Nick, you can also clarify.
Absolutely. I mean, I see a lot of opportunities in just really capitalizing on this software. And I don't want to sound like I'm selling it, but You know, there's a lot of different data pieces we can get. We have various meetings around the state, and people ask us, you know, what's the status of this? And if it's something we don't currently collect, we can send out SNAP surveys or send out these surveys and collect data unique to just about anything, just to be more well informed. So there's definitely ways we can collect more data and use it to be effective.
Great. Any other questions? And I'll open the floor to any other questions for Florida and Virginia as well. I see some people typing. All right, question, how much is this data used for water quality protection?
Is that directed to Minnesota?
I believe so, yeah.
I think, you know, for the most part, just having good data can help quantify things for funding opportunities. So knowing, you know, what regions. I'll often get emails from different counties asking questions or about, you know, like I said, the regions or watersheds that kind of go into developing different reports. So we have a report in Minnesota called the RAPS report that kind of talks about impaired waters and those watersheds. So just as an example, they use those reports to you know, kind of acquire funding. So you know, that'd be one example where it's used for water quality protection directly. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I hope everybody can see the notes, the notepad that I put up. So please do email decentralizedmou@epa.gov if you would like a copy of these slides. And please also check out our website, epa.gov/septic, to learn more about our various programs. And many of you are aware that September 17th through 21st, or whenever the end of that week is going to be Septic Smart Week. So please do keep in touch. We do have another question. Does the SNAP survey enable spreadsheets to be populated directly?
So that's a great question. It's not, I wouldn't say it's from when they hit the submit button, it doesn't populate directly into my spreadsheet, but what it does is it takes all that data and downloads it to the SNAP survey software, and then all I have to do is click a button and select data export and press it, and it automatically populates my spreadsheet. So I wouldn't say it does it directly, but it's just a few clicks away.
And thank you, Washington and Ruben, for your comments. I'm glad that you enjoyed these presentations. Any other final questions?